Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is The Green Mile by Stephen King. Now, The Green Mile was published in 1996, and this was first published as a six-part serial novel, but later on those 6 parts were all published into one novel. Now, this book was made into a movie of the same name in 1999, and this edition of the book I have is, of course, the movie tie-in edition, because the cover here is also the poster for the movie. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the film adaptation of this book at the end of this review. Now, the plot of The Green Mile is, it's primarily set in the year 1932, which of course is when the Great Depression was going on, and it follows this prison guard named Paul Edgecombe, who works in this part of the prison where they keep death row inmates. And what happens is this man comes onto death row, this very large African-American man named John Coffey. Now, this man, John Coffey, is accused of raping and killing 2 little girls, but it becomes clear pretty much from the beginning that John Coffey has the mind of a child, like he's mentally challenged, and eventually in the story, Paul discovers that John Coffey is not a normal human being. It turns out that he actually has supernatural powers, like he's pretty much a healer. Like, he can, basically, he can cure death, pretty much, and Paul cannot understand why God would put a gift like that in the hands of a man who would kill 2 little girls, but as the story goes on, it becomes clear to Paul that this man, John Coffey, did not commit the murders that he's accused of. Now, that's the basic plotline of The Green Mile. There's a lot more to the story than just that, but that's a very basic outline of the plot. Now, The Green Mile is an excellent book. This is definitely one of my favorite books by Stephen King. Like, I would actually rank this as one of his best books. Like, for me, this is right up there with his books like It, The Body, Carrie, Pet Sematary, and the Dark Tower books. Although, truthfully, I would recommend this book even if you're not a Stephen King fan, because the book is not really a horror story. It's definitely a supernatural story, but it's not really a horror novel, and let's say you're not really into horror stories, I would still recommend giving this book a read, because really this book is more of a fantasy drama. And even though there are a lot of supernatural elements in this story, I would say the book also works as a historical novel, because yes, there are supernatural things that happen in this story, but the story takes place during the time of the Great Depression, and you really feel the time period that this book takes place in. And I remember, I think Stephen King said in an interview once that this was actually a difficult book for him to write, because he, of course, was not alive during the Great Depression, so he had to do a lot of research into that time period, and his research definitely shows, because reading this book, you really do get a feel for the Great Depression. Now, The Green Mile is also one of the most heartbreaking and deeply moving books I have ever read, and this book really did make me cry. And this book, it really, like, if you don't cry by the end of this book, I don't think you have a soul. Like, the character of John Coffey is a genuinely heartbreaking character, because he's accused of a crime that he did not commit, and throughout the whole book you realize that this is a man with the mind of a child, and you realize that in reality he would never do anything to hurt anybody. If anything, he tries to help people, and yet he's accused of this crime and is about to be executed, and he is a genuinely heartbreaking character. Also, in the story, it's implied that John has suffered a lot of abuse throughout his entire life. Now, in this book, there is some commentary on things like racism, because in the story, there's a certain point where Paul tries doing his own investigating into the murder of these two little girls, and he's kind of trying to prove that John's innocent, but there's a certain point where somebody that he runs into even brings up to him that getting another trial for a black man is near impossible. And also, this book takes place in the 1930s when, unfortunately, black people were viewed as second-class citizens, if not even worse than that. Now, one really heartbreaking scene in this book is what I would call the bridge scene. Now, if you've read this book, you know exactly which part of the book I'm talking about. Now, that scene was not in the movie, but in this book, there's something that I would call the bridge scene, which is just that part of the book really did just emotionally fuck me up. Now, death is a major theme within this story, because most of the book takes place on death row, and you really get to know and care about a lot of the death row inmates, even though you realize that they're eventually going to die. They're eventually going to walk the Green Mile, which is what they call death row in this book. Like, the Green Mile is the name given to this part of the prison where the death row inmates are kept. Now, most of the book takes place in 1932, however, there are also parts of this book that take place in present day, where Paul is now an old man in a nursing home, and he compares the nursing home to the Green Mile because he compares a lot of these old people who are just sitting in this nursing home waiting to die. He compares them to the death row inmates. And once again, death is a major theme in this story because eventually we're all going to have to face death. In this book, there are also a lot of religious overtones, like Paul believes that these powers were given to John Coffey by God, and basically they're about to execute a literal gift from God. And one of the themes that this book kind of touches on is the idea that you can't escape the will of God. And if you wanted to, you could even make Christ-like analogies with the character of John Coffey. Another theme in this story is the idea that the past is always present, that no matter what we do, we cannot escape the past, and in that sense, it's very similar to his novel It, because it also dealt with that same theme, the idea of the past always being present, and very much like in It, in this book, the character of Paul Edgecump, for him, the past and the present kind of start to merge together, very similar to how the past and the present merged together for the characters in It. Now, there are two villains in this story, technically three, but I'll get to the third one in a little bit. In this book, you have a character named Percy Witmore, who is one of the prison guards, and he is such a piece of shit. Now, basically, he's like this spoiled brat, and you realize that the only reason he even has a job there is because of his political connections, but he is such an asshole in this story, and you just want to punch this character in the back of the head. In a lot of ways, he actually reminded me of the character of Barkovich, who is a character from Stephen King's novel The Long Walk. Another villain in this story is a character who we'll just call Wild Bill, who is one of the death row inmates, and he is an evil bastard. Like, I would rank both Percy Witmore and Wild Bill among some of the best Stephen King villains. Another character in this story who is technically a villain is the character of Brad Doland, who is this man who works at the nursing home that Paul is living in the parts of this book that take place in present day, and he is also an unlikable piece of shit. But yeah, The Green Mile is an excellent book, and if you haven't read this book yet, I highly, highly recommend giving this book a read. Now, as I said earlier in this review, this book was made into a movie of the same name in 1999, and the movie The Green Mile is an excellent movie. The film stars Tom Hanks as Paul Edgecombe and Michael Clarke Duncan as John Coffey. But The Green Mile is a great movie, and it's actually a pretty faithful adaptation to the book. Aside from changing a few things here and there, I would say that the movie The Green Mile is pretty true to the book. And the film The Green Mile was directed by Frank Darabont, who is one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. He also did The Shawshank Redemption, which was also based on a Stephen King story as well, and he would go on to direct the first season of The Walking Dead. But I think Frank Darabont is an excellent filmmaker, and the movie The Green Mile is an excellent adaptation of the book. But yeah, that's my review on The Green Mile by Stephen King, and bye.